October 8, 1918. The Argonne Forest, France. A lone American corporal stands in a muddy trench, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen brothers. His rifle is jammed. His commanding officer is dead. The German machine guns are tearing his unit apart. Most men would surrender. Most men would run. But Corporal Alvin York is not most men. By the end of this day, 132 German soldiers would lay down their weapons to this single American. This is the true story of the most unlikely hero of World War I, a story of faith, courage, and one man's extraordinary stand that changed the course of a battle. To understand how this happened, we first need to understand who Alvin York was. Born December 13, 1887, in a two-room log cabin in the mountains of Tennessee. Alvin Cullum York grew up in a world most Americans today can barely imagine. No electricity, no running water. His family survived on what they could hunt and what they could grow. Young Alvin became an exceptional marksman, not for sport, but for survival. Every bullet had to count because bullets cost money, and money was something the York family didn't have. He learned to shoot by aiming at turkey heads from distances of up to 40 yards. Miss the head, and you damage the meat. This skill, this precision, would one day save his life. But Alvin York was not a natural soldier. In fact, when America entered the Great War in 1917, he didn't want to go. York had found religion, joining a fundamentalist Christian church that preached against violence. When his draft notice arrived, he applied for conscientious objector status. His request was denied. The Army needed men, and Alvin York was going to war, whether he wanted to or not. At Camp Gordon, Georgia, York struggled with his conscience. How could a man who believed "thou shalt not kill" train to do exactly that? But two officers, Major George Buxton and Captain Edward Danforth, took time with the troubled private. They didn't mock his faith. They didn't dismiss his concerns. Instead, they engaged him in long discussions about duty, about protecting the innocent, about the difference between murder and defending freedom. They showed him the Bible passage from the book of Ezekiel. If the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet, and the people are not warned, and the sword comes and takes any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at the watchman's hand. The meaning was clear. Sometimes good men must stand against evil. York requested a 10-day leave to go home and think. He walked into the mountains of Tennessee, alone with his thoughts and his God. When he came back down, he had made his decision. He would serve, he would fight, but he would fight for the right reasons. By September 1918, Private York had become Corporal York, a squad leader in Company G, 328th Infantry Regiment, 82nd Division. They called themselves the All-Americans because the division drew men from across the nation, and now they were heading into one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war, the Argonne Offensive, October 8, 1918. Before dawn, Corporal York and 16 other men from Company G moved through the Argonne Forest, cold, wet, exhausted. They had been fighting for days. The forest was a nightmare of mud, barbed wire, and German machine gun nests. Their mission was to capture a German railroad, but as the morning mist began to lift, everything went wrong. German machine guns, hidden on the hillside, opened fire. The sound was deafening. The Americans dove for cover. Men were falling, screaming, dying. Sergeant Bernard Early, the unit's leader, made a split-second decision. They couldn't advance into that fire. They couldn't retreat. They had to flank. He took York and the others through a ravine, circling around the German position. And then they stumbled onto something they didn't expect. A German command post. About 25 German soldiers having breakfast. For a moment, both sides just stared at each other. Then the shooting started. The Americans had surprise on their side. The German battalion commander and several officers immediately surrendered. But the machine gunners on the hill heard the gunfire. They turned their weapons on their own command post. German machine guns, at this range, could fire 500 rounds per minute. Within seconds, Sergeant Early was hit. Then another man, and another. Of the 17 Americans who had made it to that position, 9 were already down, dead or wounded. The remaining men hugged the ground, trying to protect the German prisoners, trying to stay alive. And that's when Corporal Alvin York did something extraordinary. He positioned himself where he had a clear line of sight to the German machine gunners. And then he started shooting. One shot, one German soldier down. Another shot, another soldier down. Years of hunting in Tennessee, where every bullet counted, where missing meant going hungry, had trained York to do something remarkable. He didn't miss. York later described his technique. He aimed for the machine gunners, starting from the back of the line and working forward. Why? He learned it from turkey hunting. If you shoot the lead turkey first, the others fly away. But if you shoot from the back, the ones in front don't know they're being hunted. That mountain boy from Tennessee was applying hunting techniques to warfare, and it was devastatingly effective. The German officers watched in horror as their machine gunners, one by one, fell silent. Then a German lieutenant saw an opportunity. He fixed his bayonet and led 6 men in a direct charge at Corporal York. York dropped his rifle, drew his .45 pistol. Starting with the last man in the line, he fired. Boom. The 6th man fell. Boom. The 5th man fell. Boom. The 4th man fell. Boom. The 3rd man fell. Boom. The 2nd man fell. The lieutenant was only feet away when the final bullet stopped him. 6 men, 6 shots, in less than 10 seconds. The German major, who had witnessed the entire thing, later said he had never seen anything like it in his entire military career. At this point, York had personally killed at least 25 German soldiers. Maybe more. The chaos made it impossible to count. The German major, realizing the battle was lost, made a decision. Through the handful of Americans who spoke German, he offered to surrender. Not just himself, his entire battalion. York accepted. But then came the problem. How do you march 132 prisoners back through enemy lines with only 8 men? York's solution was pure Tennessee ingenuity. He placed the German major at the front of the column, told him very clearly that if anyone tried anything, the major would be the first to die. Then he made the prisoners carry the American wounded, and off they marched. As they moved through the German lines, York used his prisoners to capture more prisoners. When they encountered German units, the major, under York's watchful eye, ordered them to surrender. By the time York reached American lines, he had started with 16 men, lost 9, and was walking in with 132 prisoners. When his brigade commander, Brigadier General Julian Lindsay, saw the column approaching, he couldn't believe it. He asked York, "How many prisoners have you got?" York, exhausted, muddy, covered in blood, replied, "Honest, General, I ain't had time to count 'em yet." For his actions on October 8, 1918, Corporal Alvin York received the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, the Italian Croce di Guerra, and decorations from Montenegro and Serbia. Supreme Allied Commander Marshal Ferdinand Foch called York's achievement the greatest thing accomplished by any soldier of all the armies of Europe. But York himself never wanted fame. When offered money for his story, movie deals, endorsements, he turned them all down. He said, "This uniform ain't for sale." Instead, he went home to Tennessee, married his childhood sweetheart, and used his fame to raise money for schools in the poor mountain communities where he grew up. He believed that education was the key to giving other kids the opportunities he never had. Today, nearly 80 years after his death, Alvin York remains one of the most decorated American soldiers in history. But his story is more than just a tale of battlefield heroics. It's a story about a man who didn't want to fight, but fought when he had to. A man who struggled with his conscience and found a way to serve without abandoning his faith. A man who became a hero but never forgot where he came from. For those of us whose fathers or grandfathers served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, York's story reminds us that heroes don't always start out as heroes. Sometimes they're just ordinary men from small towns who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. And when that moment comes, they rise to meet it. Alvin York once said, "I'm a witness to the fact that God did help me out of that hard battle. For the bushes were shot up all around me, and I never got a scratch. So you can see that God was helping me." Whether you believe it was divine intervention, extraordinary skill, or just incredible luck, one thing is certain. On October 8, 1918, in a muddy forest in France, one man stood his ground, and 132 German soldiers went home alive because of it. That is the true story of Alvin York. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it with someone who appreciates the greatest generation. And if your family has stories from World War I or World War II, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. These stories deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching.